There comes a moment in every healing journey when you look around and realize that the crowd you once stood with has quietly disappeared. At first, it feels like loss. It feels like loneliness. You wonder why the people who once laughed with you, called you, and shared your days seem so distant now. But healing changes more than your wounds, it changes your energy. And when your energy changes, your relationships change too. Not everyone is meant to walk with the version of you that emerges after the pain. Some people were connected to your struggles, your fears, or the person you used to be. As you grow, as you become more aware of your worth, your circle naturally becomes smaller. The conversations that once felt meaningful may begin to feel empty. The places that once felt familiar may no longer feel like home. You start craving depth instead of noise, peace instead of constant attention, and genuine connection instead of temporary company. And what feels like isolation may actually be protection, preparation, and the beginning of a deeper connection with yourself. One of the most difficult parts of healing is accepting that growth often creates distance. The people who understood the old version of you may struggle to understand who you are becoming. This doesn't always happen because anyone is wrong or bad. Sometimes, it happens because your paths are no longer moving in the same direction. As your awareness expands, you begin to notice patterns you once ignored and behaviors you once accepted. You become less willing to betray your peace just to keep others comfortable. The things that once excited you may no longer hold the same meaning. The need to fit in slowly fades, replaced by a desire to be authentic. This transition can feel uncomfortable because humans naturally seek connection, yet healing sometimes asks us to walk through seasons where connection becomes limited. But these seasons are not punishments. They are sacred spaces where your soul learns how to stand on its own, where your heart learns that being alone is very different from being abandoned, and where you begin to understand that not everyone is meant to accompany you into the next chapter of your life. For many people, healing begins with pain, but it grows through solitude. There is a certain wisdom that can only be found when the noise around you becomes quiet. At first, solitude can feel uncomfortable because it removes the distractions that once kept you busy. It forces you to sit with your thoughts, your emotions, and the parts of yourself that you may have avoided for years. Yet this is where true transformation begins. In the silence, you start hearing your own voice more clearly. You begin to recognize which dreams genuinely belong to you and which ones were borrowed from the expectations of others. The approval you once searched for outside yourself slowly loses its power. Day by day, you become more comfortable in your own presence. You discover that peace is not something another person can give you. It is something that grows within you. And as this inner peace expands, your need for constant validation begins to disappear, making room for a deeper sense of self-worth and emotional freedom. There was once a young woman who experienced one of the hardest seasons of her life. Within a few months, she lost opportunities she had worked for, faced personal disappointments, and watched many friendships slowly fade away. The people who used to surround her seemed to vanish when she needed support the most. Feeling abandoned, she spent many nights questioning her value and wondering what she had done wrong. Yet through all of it, one friend remained. This friend did not always have perfect advice or magical solutions. Sometimes, they simply listened. Sometimes, they sat beside her in silence. Years later, when her life had changed and new opportunities had arrived, she looked back and realized something important. The dozens of people she lost had taught her about temporary connections, but the one person who stayed had taught her the meaning of genuine love and loyalty. Healing had reduced her circle, but it had also revealed who truly belonged in it. In the end, she understood that a smaller circle filled with sincerity is worth far more than a crowded room filled with uncertainty. One of the hidden signs of healing is realizing that not everyone will understand your journey, and that is perfectly okay. In the past, you may have spent countless hours explaining yourself, defending your choices, or trying to convince others to see life from your perspective. But as healing deepens, something begins to change. You start understanding that your growth does not require everyone's approval. Some people will misunderstand your silence and call it distance. Others will misunderstand your boundaries and call them selfishness. Yet neither of these opinions can define who you truly are. Healing teaches you that peace is often found in letting go of the need to be understood by everyone. The more secure you become within yourself, the less you feel compelled to seek validation from the outside world. You learn to trust your inner voice even when others disagree. And while this may cause certain relationships to fade, it also creates space for connections built on mutual respect rather than constant explanation. In this way, healing helps you stop performing for acceptance and start living in alignment with your authentic self. Choosing yourself is one of the most powerful and difficult decisions you will ever make. For many years, you may have been taught to prioritize the needs, expectations, and comfort of everyone around you. You may have believed that being a good person meant constantly sacrificing your own well-being. But healing reveals an important truth: caring for yourself is not selfish. It is necessary. As you begin honoring your emotional, mental, and spiritual needs, some people may become uncomfortable. They were familiar with the version of you that always said yes, always gave more than they received, and rarely asked for anything in return. When that version starts to change, resistance often follows. Yet every time you choose your peace over unnecessary drama, your growth over old habits, and your truth over people-pleasing, you strengthen your relationship with yourself. The journey is not always easy. There will be moments of doubt and loneliness. But with each step forward, you become more confident in who you are. And eventually, you realize that healing was never about becoming someone new, it was about returning to the person you were always meant to be. As healing continues, you begin to notice something surprising. The situations that once drained you no longer attract your attention. The drama that once pulled you in no longer feels interesting. The negativity that once affected your mood loses its grip on your spirit. This change does not happen overnight. It develops slowly as your awareness grows. You start recognizing how valuable your energy truly is and become more careful about where you invest it. Instead of reacting to every misunderstanding, you learn the power of staying calm. Instead of chasing people who repeatedly walk away, you learn the strength of letting them go. Your priorities begin to shift from proving yourself to protecting your peace. And because of this shift, your circle often becomes smaller. Not everyone is comfortable around someone who has learned to set boundaries and respect themselves. Some people only felt connected to the version of you that tolerated everything. But healing teaches you that protecting your energy is not an act of rejection, it is an act of self-respect. The more you value your inner peace, the more naturally you distance yourself from what constantly disturbs it. There was once an old gardener who spent years caring for a beautiful garden. Every day, he watered the flowers, removed the weeds, and gave attention to every corner of the land. One season, however, he noticed that certain plants were consuming more resources than they were giving back. They spread quickly, blocked the sunlight, and prevented healthier flowers from growing. At first, he hesitated to remove them because they had been part of the garden for a long time. But eventually, he understood that keeping them would harm everything else he had worked so hard to nurture. So with patience and care, he cleared the space. For a while, the garden looked emptier than before. There were gaps where the old plants once stood. Yet as the months passed, sunlight reached places it never could before. New flowers blossomed. Strong roots developed. The entire garden became healthier than it had ever been. Healing works much the same way. Sometimes life asks us to release people, habits, or environments that no longer support our growth. The empty spaces can feel painful at first, but those spaces often become the very places where new life begins to bloom. When your healing journey has carried you far enough, you begin to see your smaller circle differently. What once looked like loss starts to look like clarity. You realize that life was never about collecting as many connections as possible. It was about finding the ones that truly matter. The people who remain are often those who love you without conditions, respect your boundaries, and celebrate your growth without feeling threatened by it. These relationships feel different because they are built on authenticity rather than convenience. There is less pressure to pretend and more freedom to simply be yourself. You no longer fear being alone because you have learned that your worth is not measured by the number of people around you. Instead, you value depth over quantity, sincerity over popularity, and peace over constant social approval. The smaller your circle becomes, the easier it is to recognize the people who genuinely care about your well-being. And in that recognition, you discover a beautiful truth: a few meaningful connections can nourish the soul far more than a crowd ever could. The more you heal, the smaller your circle becomes, not because life is taking people away from you, but because healing is helping you see more clearly. It reveals who supports your growth, who respects your peace, and who truly belongs in your life. The journey may include lonely seasons, difficult goodbyes, and moments when you question whether the path is worth it. But every step brings you closer to yourself. Every boundary teaches self-respect. Every ending creates room for a new beginning. And every moment of solitude offers an opportunity to grow stronger, wiser, and more connected to your inner truth. One day, you will look back and realize that the people who left were not always losses. Some were lessons. Some were redirections. And some simply completed the role they were meant to play in your story. What remains after healing is not emptiness, it is clarity. It is peace. It is a heart that no longer depends on external validation to feel whole. So if your circle is becoming smaller, do not be afraid. You are not losing your place in the world. You are finding it. And as you continue becoming the person you were always meant to be, you may discover that a peaceful soul surrounded by a few genuine hearts is one of life's greatest blessings.